Okay, so this is gonna sound weird, but I swear it's real. My stepbrother found my search history. And no, not like the usual embarrassing, why do I keep searching for cat videos at 3 a.m. kind of thing. This was way more complicated. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how it all spiraled from there into something that I never saw coming. Let me back up a bit. My name's Jake, I'm 24, and I guess you could say my family situation is a little unconventional. My mom remarried a guy named Mark about 2 years ago. Mark has a son, Luke, who's 22. So yeah, stepbrothers. We never lived together before, so when my mom and Mark decided to move in together last year, all of a sudden Luke and I had to share this awkward brotherly territory, like we were supposed to magically click or something. Spoiler, we didn't. At least not at first. Luke is this super chill, kind of effortlessly cool guy. The kind who laughs too loud at his own jokes and wears vintage band tees like he's been collecting them since forever. He's got this laid-back vibe that somehow makes every room feel less tense. I, on the other hand, tend to be a little more reserved. I work from home as a graphic designer, so I'm kind of glued to my laptop most days. Not a great recipe for bonding, obviously. Anyway, here's where the plot thickens. One night, I was at home finishing up some work when Luke came in, looking for his charger. We don't really hang out or anything, so it was weird having him just casually walk into the room like he owned the place. He's always been way more confident than me, and honestly, sometimes I get kind of intimidated by how easily he navigates everything, even stuff I'm nervous about, like talking to new people or just, existing in social settings. He started messing around on my laptop while I was getting up to grab a snack. I didn't think much of it. Typical sibling stuff, right? But then I turned back, and he's staring at the screen with this smirk. And that's when he said the words I never expected to hear. Dude, what the hell is all this about? I froze, because the screen was open to my browser history. And let me tell you, my search history isn't exactly normal. I'd been digging into stuff that, was pretty personal. Like deep dives into dating tips, queer relationship advice, and even some romantic poetry that I'd been too embarrassed to save anywhere else. I guess in trying to figure out parts of myself, I'd left this trail that felt way too exposed to be stumbled upon by someone like Luke. The weirdest part? Instead of laughing or teasing me, Luke just looked. Curious. And maybe a little impressed. Because what came next blew me away. He didn't back off or shut me down. Instead, he started talking about things I never expected him to talk about. Things about himself, about what he's been through, stuff he'd never said out loud before. And just like that, the stepbrother awkwardness started to fade, replaced by this strange but real connection. Something about the whole mess made me realize there was way more to him and to me than we'd both admitted. I still can't believe how it all began with him finding my search history, because that night changed everything. But honestly, I have no idea where it's going next. Luke closed the laptop gently and leaned back in the chair with that same smirk. Only this time, it didn't feel like he was teasing me. It was more like he was inviting me into something, like he was saying, "Hey, I get it." I wasn't sure if I was ready for that kind of honesty, but somehow, it already felt like the beginning of something different. So, he said, scratching the back of his neck, "You've been doing some serious research here. What's the story?" I hesitated, heart pounding, trying to decide how much to share. Normally, I'd keep stuff like this locked up tight, even from people I'm close to. But Luke wasn't just anyone. I was starting to realize he might be the one person I could actually be honest with. "Honestly," I said, "I've been trying to figure out how to date. Like, not just dating in general, but dating as a gay guy. It's complicated." Luke nodded. "Yeah, I get that. I'm out too, in case you didn't know." That shook me a little. I mean, we'd lived under the same roof for months, but he'd never really talked about it. I guess I'd assumed he was straight because of how laid back and confident he seemed around girls. Turns out, I was wrong. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked quietly. "Family stuff," he said, shrugging. "My dad isn't exactly the easiest person to come out to. He found out last year and it didn't go well." His voice got a little quieter. So I just kept it to myself around them. But with you, I don't know. Feels different. That hit me in a way I didn't expect. Here was Luke, this confident, cool guy who had his own hidden battles, and suddenly that gap between us felt smaller. Like maybe we weren't just stepbrothers forced into awkward proximity. We could be something more, even if we didn't know exactly what yet. We ended up talking for hours that night. We shared stories about our first crushes, bad dates, and the weird way we both tried to hide who we really were. It was strange but refreshing to talk so openly with someone who wasn't judging, who understood the messy parts. A few days later, things between us started to shift. It wasn't like overnight we became best friends or anything, but there was this easy vibe now. Luke would leave little notes on my desk, just silly doodles or inside jokes, and I found myself looking forward to those tiny moments. One evening, about a week after the search history incident, Luke and I were playing video games in the living room. It was one of those rare times when we were actually hanging out, not just coexisting. I could tell he was distracted though, kept glancing over at me like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, he paused the game and said, "Hey, can I ask you something kinda random?" "Shoot," I said, bracing myself. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending? Like you put on this mask around people because you're scared they won't like the real you?" I laughed nervously, all the time. "Me too," he said, "especially around my dad. And sometimes even here, around the whole family stuff." We were quiet for a moment, just listening to the TV in the background. Then Luke reached over and bumped my shoulder with his. "But with you, I don't have to pretend." I felt my chest tighten, partly from relief, partly because that simple gesture, him being so comfortable around me, meant more than I expected. "Same here," I admitted. Something shifted in the room then. The air felt a little warmer, a little closer. I wasn't sure if it was just me noticing it or if Luke felt it too. Over the next few weeks, we started hanging out more intentionally. Not just brief, accidental run-ins, but actual plans. Sometimes we'd grab coffee, other times just sit on the porch and listen to music. Every conversation peeled back layers I didn't realize we both had. One night, after a movie marathon that ended way too late, Luke turned to me and said, "You know, I'm really glad you didn't freak out when I found your search history." I smiled. "Yeah, me too. I was ready to crawl under a rock." He laughed. I think that was the best mistake I ever made. We stared at each other for a beat, the kind of silence that feels full of something, but neither of us said anything. But I could tell Luke was thinking the same thing I was. Maybe this stepbrother thing wasn't just about family anymore. Maybe it was something neither of us had planned for, but both secretly wanted. And honestly, I was terrified and excited all at once, because whatever this was turning into, it was real, and I wasn't ready to let it go. After that night, I started noticing the little things Luke did differently around me. Like the way he'd linger just a bit longer when our hands accidentally brushed, or how his jokes got softer, more personal. At first, I chalked it up to us finally breaking the ice, but deep down, I started wondering if there was more beneath the surface. One Saturday afternoon, Luke and I were at this old record store downtown, flipping through vinyl like a couple of regulars. I was half paying attention to the music when he suddenly held up a worn-out album cover, grinning. "Ever listen to this band?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but you're always dragging me into your weird music choices." He laughed. "Fair, but this one's special." He handed it over, and as I examined the cover, I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, like he wanted me to see him, really see him. We ended up sitting on a bench outside the store, the afternoon sun warm on our faces. Luke pulled out his phone and played a song from that album, a slow, almost melancholy track that somehow felt like it was speaking directly to us. "I used to listen to this when things got rough," he said quietly, "back when I thought I had to hide everything about myself." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't just about music. It was about everything we'd been trying to figure out. "I'm glad you found your way out," I said, surprising myself with how honest I was getting. He looked at me then, eyes soft but intense. "Me too." There was a pause, and suddenly the world felt smaller, like it was just the two of us sitting there, connected in a way I hadn't thought possible between stepbrothers. Later that week, things got even more complicated. We were in the kitchen, making dinner. Well, Luke was making it. I was mostly just watching and trying not to burn the garlic bread. The conversation drifted to relationships, and I found myself blurting out, "Have you ever been with someone? Like, really with someone?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "A couple of times. Nothing serious. What about you?" "Not really," I admitted. "I guess I've been too scared to put myself out there." Luke looked up then, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable flicker across his face. "Maybe you're just waiting for the right person." "Maybe," I said, though a part of me wasn't so sure. The moment hung between us, charged and unspoken. I caught my breath when Luke reached over and brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like everything. "Jake," he said softly, "I know we're supposed to be stepbrothers and all that, but I don't know. Sometimes, stuff just doesn't fit into neat boxes." I swallowed hard, heart pounding. Yeah, I feel that. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. It was like the world had shifted, and suddenly the line between friendship, family, and something more was blurry and confusing. One evening, we found ourselves back on the porch, just the two of us sitting side by side. The sky was a deep purple, stars starting to peek through. Luke turned to me with that same easy smile that always made my nerves settle. "Do you want to go out sometime? Like, on a date?" I blinked, caught off guard but thrilled all at once. "Yeah, I'd like that," he grinned. "Cool, me too." From that moment on, everything started to change. We began exploring what was between us with a mix of curiosity and caution, trying to balance the awkwardness of our family dynamic with the excitement of something new. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the reality of being stepbrothers hit hard. The questions, the what-ifs, the fear of messing everything up. But every time I looked at Luke, all that fear seemed to fade. One night, after a late dinner and some bad jokes, Luke took my hand in his, fingers intertwining naturally. "Whatever happens," he said, "I'm glad we found each other." I squeezed his hand back, smiling. "Me too, Luke. Me too." After that night, things between Luke and me felt different, but not in a way that made it awkward or forced. It was more like we were finally navigating uncharted territory together, figuring out what this new connection meant without any pressure or expectations. We started spending more time outside the house, too. One evening, Luke suggested we go for a walk around the neighborhood. It was just the two of us, the cool spring air wrapping around us as we wandered past familiar houses and quiet streets. "I've never really gotten to know this area," Luke said, glancing at me with that half smile he does when he's about to say something meaningful but isn't quite ready. "Me neither," I admitted. "I've been buried in work most of the time, honestly." He nodded. "Yeah, same. It's weird how life just sort of drags you along without you noticing." There was a pause, and then he laughed softly. "I guess that's why this is nice, getting to slow down, even if only for a bit." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "Yeah, I'm glad we're doing this." We kept walking, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations that flow naturally when you're comfortable with someone. At some point, the topic shifted to family, and Luke's expression darkened a little. "My dad still hasn't really accepted me," he said quietly. "I try not to let it get to me, but some days it's hard." I stopped walking and looked at him. "I'm sorry, Luke. That really please mess." He shrugged, trying to brush it off. "It's life. At least I've got you now, right?" "Exactly," I said, and meant it. Our talk made me realize how much Luke had been carrying alone all this time. It wasn't just about being stepbrothers or figuring out feelings. It was about supporting each other through real struggles. Over the next few weeks, we started opening up even more. One night, after a long day, Luke dropped by my place with a couple of beers and a nervous grin. We ended up sprawled on the couch, the kind of lazy hangout that feels safe and familiar. At one point, he turned to me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm really glad you found your search history." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Yeah, that was a weird way to start all this." He smiled, eyes soft. Sometimes the weirdest things lead to the best stuff. That night, I realized I was falling for him. Not just the guy who happened to be my stepbrother, but Luke. The person who made me laugh, made me feel seen, and made me hope for something more. But with that came a flood of doubts. What if we were making a huge mistake? What if my mom and Mark found out? Would they freak out? And the biggest question, could this really work? Or were we just caught up in a confusing moment? One afternoon, I found myself pacing the living room, phone in hand, debating whether to bring it up with Luke. I finally messaged him. "Can we talk? Like, really talk?" He replied almost immediately. "Always." Later that night, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the tension thick but necessary. I took a deep breath and said, "Luke, I like you, more than just as a friend or stepbrother. But I'm scared of what people will think, of messing this up." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "I'm scared too, but I don't want to let fear keep me from something that feels real." His words hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, the unknown didn't seem so scary because I wasn't facing it alone. From there, things moved slowly but surely. We set boundaries, talked about how to handle family, and promised to be honest with each other no matter what. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments and missteps, but it was ours. One evening, after a long day, Luke and I sat on the porch, the sky painted with stars. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Whatever happens, I'm glad we're in this together." I wrapped my arm around him, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. "Me too, Luke. Me too." That night, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings, like a found search history, can lead to the most meaningful journeys, and I was ready to see where this one would take us. I wish I could say everything fell into place after that night on the porch, but real life tends to have a way of complicating even the simplest things. For starters, keeping Luke and my feelings under wraps at home became trickier than I expected. We were around each other every day, and trying to act like just stepbrothers while wanting to do the exact opposite was like a constant game of emotional tug-of-war. One afternoon, Mom called me into the living room. She was sitting across from Mark, the kind of serious look on her face that instantly made me nervous. Luke was nowhere to be seen, but I had a sinking feeling this wasn't about anything casual. "Jake," Mom started, voice softer than I expected. "How are things with Luke? You two seem closer lately." I swallowed hard, trying to read her expression. Was this going to be one of those "we need to talk about boundaries" conversations? Because honestly, I wasn't sure we'd figured all that out ourselves. Before I could answer, Mark spoke up. "We just want to make sure you guys are comfortable living together." "It's a big adjustment, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment." Mom gave me a little smile, but there was a question in her eyes. "Jake, you can tell us anything. We're family." I wanted to tell her everything right then, but the words stuck in my throat. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't sure how to explain what was happening without making it sound like some dramatic soap opera. "Thanks, Mom," I said instead. "I appreciate that." After the talk, I went back to my room, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. If they were sensing something, then maybe it was only a matter of time before the secret leaked out. And that terrified me. Luke and I met up later that night, texting back and forth until he invited me over. When I got to his room, he was sitting on the bed, looking a little pale but determined. "Mom and Mark asked me about you today," he said, almost like it was a confession. I nodded. "Yeah, they did the same with me. Think they're onto something?" He shrugged. "Maybe, but I don't want to hide anymore. Not from them, not from you." I admired his courage, even though I wasn't sure I was ready to be that open. Still, knowing Luke felt the same made me feel less alone. The next day, we decided to sit down with Mom and Mark. We weren't exactly sure how to start, but once the words came out, slow, hesitant at first, it felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I like Luke," I said, heart racing. "More than just as a stepbrother." Mom blinked, then smiled warmly. "Thank you for trusting us with this, Jake. We love both of you, and we want to support you." Mark nodded. Family is family. It doesn't matter how it's formed. Hearing that made me realize how lucky I was to have parents who could be this accepting. It didn't erase the complexity of the situation, but it gave me hope. Of course, there were practical challenges too, like figuring out how to be public without making things weird for everyone else. Luke and I agreed to keep things low-key, at least until we felt more comfortable. We held hands when we could, shared quick kisses when no one was looking, and spent hours talking about what we wanted from this. If anything, one night, after watching a movie in the living room, Luke leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about what could happen if we told everyone? Like, really told them?" I thought about it for a moment. Yeah, but I'm scared. What if people don't get it? What if it changes everything? He nodded. Me too. But maybe it's worth the risk. We didn't have the answers, but we had each other, and that felt like enough for now. Over time, our relationship deepened in ways I didn't expect. We learned each other's quirks. How Luke always needed his morning coffee a certain way. How I liked to listen to music when I worked, and found comfort in those small routines. One afternoon, Luke surprised me by showing up at my door with a picnic basket and a goofy grin. We spent hours in the park, lying on the grass, talking about dreams and fears, and just enjoying being together without any labels or pressure. That day, as the sun dipped below the trees, he took my hand and said, "I'm glad it was my stupid curiosity that found your search history. Otherwise, I might never have known you like this." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a smile spread across my face. Yeah, me too. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments, awkward, embarrassing, or downright scary, can open doors you never knew were there. And for me, that door led to Luke. To us. Whatever comes next, I know one thing. I'm ready to walk through it with him. Not gonna lie, the days and weeks after that picnic in the park were a whirlwind, but in a good way. Luke and I settled into this rhythm that felt genuine, like we were building something just for us, even if the whole stepbrother thing still made everything a little complicated in the background. One evening, I was parked at my desk, trying to hammer out a design project, when my phone buzzed. It was Luke. "Think you can sneak out for a bit?" The text read. I shot back. "Depends. What's the plan?" "Trust me. Meet me at the corner of Maple and 5th and 20? Curiosity piqued. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The night air was crisp, the kind that makes you want to walk just a little slower to soak it in. When I got to the corner, Luke was waiting, leaning against his old car with that signature half grin. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. "Always," I said, laughing. He pulled out his keys, and for a second, the thought hit me how normal this felt. Not just the two of us sneaking out in the middle of the week, but the way it felt like Luke and I were partners in crime, figuring everything out together. We drove out of town to this little lookout spot Luke had discovered months ago. The city lights stretched below, sparkling like a sea of stars, and the quiet was a welcome change from the buzz of daily life. We sat on the hood of the car, shoulders brushing, and I could feel the electricity in the air. Not the awkward stepbrother kind, but something way more intimate. "Jake," Luke started, voice softer than usual. "Do you ever think about the future? Like, what this could even look like?" I looked out at the city, then back at him. All the time. And honestly, I get scared, but also excited. He nodded, eyes locked on mine. Same here. I want us to be honest with each other no matter what comes next. For a moment, I thought about how easy it was to say those words to him, how natural it felt to imagine a future where Luke wasn't just my stepbrother, but my boyfriend, my partner. That night marked a subtle shift for us. We started planning little things together, dinners out, weekend trips, even talking about how to handle holidays with our blended family without making it weird. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. One Saturday, after a family dinner that had been a little too quiet and stiff, Luke and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Do you ever worry about Mom and Mark? Like, what happens if this all gets too much for them?" "I do," I admitted. "But I also think they want us to be happy. They're just figuring it out, same as us." Luke smiled, but there was a flash of doubt in his eyes. "Yeah, I hope so." That vulnerability made me want to pull him close and tell him everything would be okay, but instead I just squeezed his shoulder. "Hey, we've got this," I said. "Together." He nodded, and for a moment, the tension lifted. The next couple of months were this mix of sweet moments and quiet challenges. We had our inside jokes, our late-night talks, the occasional goofy dance-offs in the living room that left us both laughing until we couldn't breathe. But there were also those times when the reality of our situation settled in. The teasing from extended family members who didn't quite get it, the awkward questions from curious friends, and the constant balancing act of blending family and romance. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, Luke and I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the TV murmuring quietly in the background. "I never thought I'd find someone like this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, eyes shining. "Me neither. It's crazy how life works sometimes." I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm glad it's you." He smiled, leaning into my touch. "Me too, Jake. Me too." In that quiet moment, I realized that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, the connection we had was real. It wasn't defined by labels or family ties, but by the trust and love we'd built together. And honestly, that felt like everything. There's a quiet kind of peace that settles in when you finally stop fighting who you are and just let things be. For me, that peace came slowly, like a sunrise spilling light into the darkest corners. Luke and I kept taking one step at a time, no grand announcements or dramatic gestures, just small moments that felt honest and real. Like the way he'd bring me coffee in the morning, or how we'd share a look across a crowded room that said, "You're my person." Nothing flashy, just us. One weekend, we decided to host a little dinner at the house, just close family and a few friends. I was nervous at first. What would people think? Would Mom and Mark's family be uncomfortable? But Luke squeezed my hand before we walked in, that steady confidence I'd come to lean on. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Conversations flowed, laughter bubbled up in all the right places, and no one made things weird. Mom caught my eye across the table and smiled, that same warm smile that had made me feel safe when I first started to open up. Mark gave Luke a nod that said, "I see you," and that was enough. Later, when everyone had left, Luke and I sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket against the cool night air. He said softly. "I was scared for a long time, scared of what this would mean for us." I nodded. "Me too, but now, I can't imagine life without you." He smiled and leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine. "Neither can I." In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about being stepbrothers, or the awkwardness of our past. It was about two people choosing each other, day after day, with all the messy, imperfect humanity that comes with it. We didn't need big declarations or perfect circumstances. We just needed honesty, patience, and the courage to be ourselves. And somehow, that was more than enough. Looking back, I'm grateful for that unexpected moment, the day Luke found my search history. It set off a chain of events that led me to someone who sees me, who challenges me, and who makes me feel at home. Life isn't always tidy, and love rarely follows a straightforward path. But when it's real, when it's right, you find your way, and I found mine with Luke.